The purpose of this module is to introduce and briefly describe the minimum survey disclosure elements associated with APOR's Transparency Initiative. It is important to note that these items are the same as those found in the first part of Section 3A of the APOR Code of Professional Ethics and Practices, which was revised in May 2015. Members of the Transparency Initiative are expected to report each of the data elements described in this presentation at the time that they publicly release survey findings. For surveys that are not publicly released, members are expected to report these data elements when providing survey findings to a survey's sponsor. The following slides briefly discuss each of these data elements. Most fundamentally, it is important to report who sponsored the research study and who conducted it. If different from the survey's sponsor, the original sources of funding for the survey should also be disclosed. Also critical is knowledge of the exact wording and presentation of questions and responses whose results are being reported, including any preceding interviewer or respondent instructions and any preceding questions that might reasonably be expected to influence responses to the reported results. What population is the survey designed to represent? To answer this, a definition of the population under study, including its geographic location, should be clearly stated. The specific dates of data collection should also be clearly stated. A description of the sampling frame used to identify the target population should also be reported, along with acknowledgement of any segment of the target population that is not covered by the sample frame. For example, exclusion of Alaska and Hawaii in any survey designed to represent the U.S. population should be acknowledged. Other examples might include exclusion of specific provinces or rural areas in international surveys, or exclusion of non-panel members in panel surveys. If possible, the estimated size of non-covered segments should be reported. If a size estimate is not available, this should also be acknowledged. Also, if no frame or list was utilized, this should be reported as well. If the sampling frame and/or the sample itself was provided by a third party, the supplier should be named. For surveys based on samples drawn from a pre-recruited panel or pool of respondents, the methods used to recruit the panel or participants should be indicated. It is also important to provide a description of the sample design, giving a clear indication of the method by which the respondents were selected, recruited, intercepted, or otherwise contacted or encountered, along with any eligibility requirements and/or oversampling. If quotas were used, the variables defining the quotas will be reported. If a within-household selection procedure was used, this needs to be described. The description of the sampling frame and sample design must include sufficient detail to determine whether the respondents were selected using probability or non-probability methods. Sample sizes and a discussion of the precision of findings are also important to clearly report. In reporting of sample sizes, they should be provided for each frame if more than one was used. In addition, for probability samples, estimates of sampling error should be provided. When reporting this information, it is also important to indicate whether or not the reported margins of sampling error or statistical analyses have been adjusted for design effects due to weighting, clustering, or any other factors. The method or methods and mode or modes used to administer the survey, for example, CADI, CAPI, ACASI, IVR, mail survey, web survey, and the language or languages offered should be clearly described. It is important to recognize that the disclosure requirements when reporting error estimates for non-probability samples are different because the precision of estimates from such samples is a model-based measure rather than the average deviation from the population value over all possible samples, as is the case with probability samples. Reports of non-probability samples should only provide measures of precision when they can be accompanied by a detailed description of how the underlying model was specified, its assumptions validated, and the measure or measures calculated. To avoid confusion, it is best to avoid using the term margin of error or margin of sampling error in conjunction with non-probability samples. If weighted estimates are reported, a description of how the sample weights were calculated, including the variables used and the sources of the weighting parameters, should be provided. Who to contact for additional information about the survey should also be provided. Finally, if the results reported are based on multiple samples or multiple modes of data collection, all of the items discussed in this module need to be disclosed for each. We've made available on the Transparency Initiative website additional materials that can help provide guidance regarding the reporting of each of these items. You'll also find there annotated examples of methodological reporting that contain each of these disclosure elements. As a reminder, these are just examples, and organizations are encouraged to report this information using the format that they consider best. In addition to these items, compliance with the Transparency Initiative also requires organizations to make available within 30 days of any formal request the items listed here. We describe these in greater detail in the next informational module. It is important also to know that every 5 years, APOR is required by its bylaws to formally review its Code of Professional Ethics and Practices. Any changes made during these periodic reviews may be reflected in the specific disclosure elements required by the Transparency Initiative. The elements presented in this module are based on the version of the APOR Code that was revised in May 2015. Thanks for your interest in the Transparency Initiative. If you have any questions, please contact us at transparency@apor.org. Thank you.